A plane vanishes in 1955 and then lands 37 years later. The world's biggest particle collider might have cracked open reality itself, and people swear things have felt off ever since. And is it possible that we're all immortal? I'll explain later. These are disturbing signs that you're already living in a parallel universe. Is it possible that we're all immortal? Not in the way that you'll never age or anything like that, but in a more like you'll never die kind of way. It's called quantum immortality, and it's one of the weirder consequences of quantum physics. Here's the basic idea. Most of us have probably heard of the theory that multiple realities form from every decision we make, every situation we find ourselves in. In quantum mechanics, there's a theory that every time something happens, the universe splits, creating a parallel universe where things went the other way. For example, let's say you're walking across the street and you nearly get hit by a bus. Close call. Well, in another reality, the bus didn't miss. In another, you were nowhere near it. In another, the bus didn't even show up. Now, you, the observer, are at the center of your own timeline. Here's where the immortality aspect comes in. If you can't observe a version of the universe where you're dead, you'll always end up in the one where you survive. That means every time you should have died, you just didn't. At least you don't experience the version where you did. From your point of view, you'll always wake up in the version of reality where you lived. Sure, other people might attend your funeral in their timelines, or the ones you used to be in, but you never actually experience death. You just keep shifting into the universe where you dodged the bullet. Now, I'm not exactly sure where old age comes into this. I mean, eventually we all do die, right? But I don't know, maybe reincarnation plays into this somehow. Look, it's totally unprovable, but it's a neat idea, and at the very least, maybe there's a version of all of our lives where we make it to 100 and pass away peacefully in bed, rather than dying in some awful accident or something. Pan Flight 914 is a story that keeps getting passed around because, real or not, it's an interesting story. A Pan Am Douglas DC-4 with 62 people on board took off from New York headed to Miami on July 2nd of 1955. It vanished. Radio contact was lost, and it was presumed to have crashed, but then something weird happens. Just not for another 37 years. In 1992, the same plane allegedly appeared out of nowhere on the radar of an airport in Venezuela. Air traffic control made contact and the pilot sounded confused, saying they were en route to Miami and due to land at 9:55 a.m., as if no time had passed. The story goes there were witnesses who said the tower told the pilot where he was, which reportedly freaked him out. He supposedly panicked, restarted the engines, and took off again before anyone could stop him. The plane eventually landed in Miami shortly afterward, but authorities supposedly kept the incident quiet. Some versions of the story say the passengers were dazed, carrying outdated newspapers and IDs with no idea that they just jumped forward in time. But is this just an urban legend, or did something actually unexplainable happen that was quickly covered up? The Large Hadron Collider has been at the center of multiple wild theories ever since it switched on in 2008. Officially, it's a massive particle accelerator built by the European Organization for Nuclear Research, or CERN. It was created to smash atoms together at insane speeds in order to study the makeup of the universe. But there are plenty of people who think that something very strange happened when this thing was switched on, that a sort of Pandora's box was unleashed. One theory is that when the LHC fired up, there was this shift, that it either created a parallel universe or blended ours with another. The timing does kinda line up with when people started reporting strange phenomena on a big scale. The Mandela Effect, for example, really exploded in popularity around the same time, but people also started sharing more personal stories on internet forums about how time just didn't seem to be moving right anymore, or how reality felt off in subtle ways they couldn't quite explain. And it didn't help that in 2016, CERN released a video of what looked like a human sacrifice ritual taking place on their grounds, which they later said was a prank. And do I believe that? Yeah, first of all, I just think that's a funny idea. I love that they went there. And I also just don't think there was a genuine ritual sacrifice captured on camera here. For anyone who is already skeptical though, they were even more skeptical after this. But what do you think? Have you noticed weird shifts in your reality since 2008? I'll give you this, it is a weirder world we're living in. News of this just came out the other day. Last October off the coast of Yemen, a US Air Force drone captured something no one can really explain. A leaked video, handed anonymously to Congressman Eric Burleson, shows what he called an orb hovering over the water. An MQ-9 Reaper drone locks onto it and launches a Hellfire missile. One of the most destructive weapons in the US arsenal. These things are designed to shred tanks. But in the footage, the missile smashes directly into the orb and nothing happens. Journalist George Knapp described it during a hearing, saying, quote, "That's the Hellfire missile smacking into the UFO and just bouncing right off, and it kept going." The impact seemed to nudge the object slightly, even knock some debris loose, but then it just corrects its path and carries on fine. 3 military veterans confirmed what everyone was thinking. There's no human technology that could take a direct Hellfire hit and stay intact. The Department of Defense, when pressed, refused to comment. Burleson didn't speculate on exactly what the object was, but he made it clear that this was not normal. Did some kind of black hole open this girl's apartment? So this woman had a very strange incident involving her Apple Pencil. Seems there was some sort of glitch, but not the type of glitch tech support could help you with. So she talks about how she only has one Apple Pencil, has only ever had one Apple Pencil, and it's immediately recognizable because it was damaged by a dog. She also kept her Apple Pencil in the same place, the case on her desk by her iPad, but one day a second Apple Pencil suddenly turns up in her apartment and it's got the same bite marks. Now, if we're to assume this story is true, that is pretty dang strange, but stuff like this happens. I think we've all had an experience in the same kind of vein, finding two of something you thought you only had one of, personal belongings going missing and then turning up in a very obvious spot, stuff like that. What's going on? I can't say for sure, but is it possible that different realities briefly cross over and sometimes items from some parallel version of reality get left behind? I don't know. Back in 1995, NASA pointed the Hubble Space Telescope at what looked like the most boring spot in the sky, an area of darkness in the constellation Ursa Major, where there didn't seem to be anything at all. They left the shutter open for 10 days straight, and when the image came back, it shocked everyone. That quote-unquote empty patch of space was actually packed with thousands of galaxies, not stars, not planets, entire galaxies, each one holding billions of stars. The photo became known as the Hubble Deep Field, and it's still one of the most incredible space images ever taken. It's crazy how far away some of these galaxies are. We're talking about light that left them more than 12 billion years ago, meaning we're literally looking back in time almost to the beginning of the universe. And this was just one tiny piece of sky. Astronomers compared it to looking through a straw. They later repeated the experiment with newer cameras, creating the Ultra Deep Field and the Extreme Deep Field, which revealed even more distant galaxies. Some of the faintest smudges in those pictures are the oldest galaxies ever seen. In this next clip, a group of people are hanging outside when they notice something strange. It's the middle of the night, but all of a sudden the sky lights up bright blue, like it instantly turned into daytime. And then, just as quick, everything snaps back to darkness. And yeah, there's a storm rolling in, you can see heavy clouds and faint flashes of lightning in the distance, but this was clearly not a normal lightning strike. The whole sky lit up so bright it looked like the sun had risen for a few seconds before disappearing again. And finally, this strange video was posted by a girl who seems to be experiencing something mysterious in her backyard, in that it changes when she goes from her balcony to the ground floor. And then she opens the back door and steps outside, and so as you can see, the backyard looks totally different from the view we saw on the balcony. Where did all the garbage go? Now, assuming this isn't a hoax, which is always possible, this is a pretty strange situation. But speaking of garbage though, I don't know if she had a party the night before or something, but dear God, what is with all that trash? Don't live like that. Raccoons are gonna get into it. Over the last few decades, thousands of people have vanished in national parks and forests across North America. Some of these cases are a lot stranger than others and share some eerie patterns. The person disappears suddenly, often in the middle of a group, only to be found, if they're found at all, in places that had already been searched. sometimes miles away, sometimes in impossible locations like high cliffs or extra dense parts of the woods that would be super hard to reach even with gear. And in some of these cases, the missing person reappears with zero memory of where they've been or how long they were gone. Former police officer David Paulides has been collecting these cases under what he calls Missing 411. He specifically filters out incidents with logical explanations so that what's left are stories that truly don't make sense. In some reports, tracking dogs have refused to follow the scent or get visibly spooked. Clocks act strangely, storms roll in out of nowhere, and in a few extreme examples, the person claims they were watched or lured by something they couldn't quite explain. One theory is that these people aren't just getting lost, they're slipping through cracks in reality. In the early 80s, rumors started circulating about strange military experiments happening at Camp Hero, an old Air Force station in Montauk, New York. The story went that there was psychic testing going on, time travel, and the opening of gateways to other dimensions. A few people had come forward saying they'd been a part of it, either willingly or as kids who were abducted into the program. According to these accounts, the government was trying to weaponize the human mind. They supposedly succeeded in creating psychic soldiers who could manipulate objects, see and hear things that were going on from very distant locations, or even open dimensional rifts. There's one story where they allegedly opened a portal too wide and something came through, something not human. Supposedly, they shut the project down after that. Another account describes a time chair, which let people travel into the past or future, but often came with disorienting side effects. Of course, there have never been any official documents that have confirmed any of this. It's easy to pass this off as an urban legend, but the thing is, some of the same people involved in these stories also had ties to MKUltra, which was very real and proven. So that's kind of given the Montauk Project a little more validity to some. As always though, what do you think? This next one goes back to 1943, in the middle of World War II. The story is that US Navy tried to make a ship invisible to radar at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The ship was the USS Eldridge, but according to people who claim to have witnessed it, something much stranger happened. That's putting it lightly. Something cosmically horrific happened. They say the ship vanished completely and then reappeared hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, and when it came back, the crew was not well. First off, there were a ton of them missing, and many who had shown back up with the ship were quite literally with the ship. They'd fused into the metal. The lucky ones just went insane, claiming to have seen something on the other side. The Navy has always denied that anything like this happened, but the story came to light through a man named Carl Allen, who sent letters detailing the events later. Of course, he was written off for being unstable, but the story took off anyway. There's even an X-Files episode about this one. To be fair, X-Files goes in some incredibly weird directions, so this is in no way adding validity to the story, but it does go to show just how much the Philadelphia experiment, as it came to be called, was talked about. What's interesting about this story is how specific it is, too. It doesn't really feel like your typical urban legend. It sounds more like someone trying to explain something that they don't fully understand. Who knows, maybe something strange really did happen that day. Maybe there really was an experiment that caused a breach in the fabric of reality. In the small town of Taos, New Mexico, people have been hearing a strange sound since the early 90s, a low-frequency hum, like a distant engine running, a hum that never seems to go away. Not everyone hears it, but for those who do, it's constant. Where does it come from? Well, that's the mystery. But the people who hear it report headaches, insomnia, and just overall dread, like something's just off. The government has sent scientists to investigate. They've recorded the environment, tested the soil, the air, everything, but they couldn't find what was actually causing it. The hum isn't picked up by microphones or equipment, so it's basically impossible to study. It's almost like it's happening inside the victims' bodies, which is about as terrifying as it sounds, no pun intended. Now, there are theories as to what this could be. Electromagnetic interference, underground drilling, some sort of secret military technology, but is it possible people are hearing something even stranger than that? Like an echo from another dimension? Maybe the hum isn't a sound at all, but more of a frequency from another place, something leaking in Just a thought. A woman named Pam Reynolds was brain dead for over an hour. Somehow, she came back describing things she couldn't have possibly known. In 1991, Reynolds underwent a rare procedure called a standstill operation to remove a brain aneurysm. Her body temperature was lowered significantly, her heartbeat and brain activity were completely stopped, and her eyes were taped shut. She was clinically dead, and yet, after she was revived, she gave eerily accurate descriptions of the operating room. She even described the exact surgical tools being used and recounted conversations between doctors. That's because when she was under, she claimed that she floated out of her body and saw herself laying on the table before being pulled toward a tunnel of light. She said she met dead relatives there who communicated with her without speaking, and that she needed to be convinced to return to her body, which of course she did. But what exactly happened here? How could someone with no brain function, no sensory input, describe real-time events in such clear detail? Till this day, there's never been a definitive explanation for this. Ong's Hat was a real village in New Jersey, now abandoned. In the late 80s though, pamphlets and documents started surfacing claiming secret experiments happened there involving interdimensional travel. So a group called the Institute for Chaos Studies allegedly set up a lab in the Pine Barrens. There they built a device known as the Egg, a sensory deprivation pod meant to alter consciousness. The theory was that under the right conditions, the pod could shift someone into a parallel universe. Well, supposedly it worked. Some of the researchers vanished, remaining in some alternate version of Earth. These so-called documents circulated in zines and early internet forums. Nowadays, this is mostly seen as a hoax, and I'm sure a lot of people also saw it that way back then, but some still insist there was something strange actually going on here, that maybe, at the very least, the story was some sort of cover-up for actual experiments with, fictional elements used to discredit anything and distract people from anything disturbing that was actually happening. I don't know, what do you guys think of this one? Bold Street has become a rather infamous area in Liverpool, where dozens of people have claimed to experience time slips. One story goes that a young woman named Imogen had gone shopping for some things for her sister's new baby. As she walked toward the corner of Lord Street in Whitechapel, she was excited to see a new mother care store that she hadn't noticed before. Inside, she browsed through items like baby cardigans and bibs, surprised at how cheap everything was. When she went to pay with her credit card at the front, the cashier looked confused and called the manager over. The manager turned and told Imogen that they didn't accept credit cards, only cash. Since she had none on her, Imogen left empty-handed, but when she told her mother what happened, her mom looked stunned. The mother care store had closed years ago, and the spot was now a bank, the very bank her mom used. And that's not the only weird story to come out of Bold Street. In 2006, a young man named Sean was caught shoplifting in Liverpool. While fleeing down Hanover Street, he turned into Brooks Alley, a dead end. As he caught his breath, he suddenly felt strange, like the air had thickened. He basically just waited for the security guard to follow, but no one came. Confused, Sean stepped back out into Hanover Street and instantly knew something was wrong. The street looked older. The cars were vintage. Roadworks he'd seen earlier were gone. People walked by in these outdated clothes, and there were traffic lights where there shouldn't be any. Sean pulled out his phone. There was no signal. He rushed towards Bold Street and spotted a newspaper stand. The date on the paper was May 18th, 1967. Terrified, Sean ran to a jewelry store where he pulled out his phone again, and this time it worked. Just like that, he was back in the present. Later, when he told his story to the local press, he repeated it in the exact same way every time, and while people assumed he made it up to dodge shoplifting charges, the newspaper followed up, and not only did they find his account consistent, but all the historical details he described, down to the clothes, the street layout, businesses, they were accurate for Liverpool in 1967. Even the security guard kinda backed it up. He said when he chased Sean into Brooks Alley, the kid had simply vanished. On November 9th of 1986, Spanish industrial expert Pedro Olivia Ramirez was driving from Seville to Alcalá del Guadera late at night. He knew the road well, but suddenly, after a curve, everything changed. The road widened into 3 massive lanes in each direction, surrounded by tall, strange buildings that he didn't recognize. On one side were huge glowing industrial buildings, on the other were these towering apartment buildings with 20 floors or so. None of it made sense, and things just got weirder from there. Pedro started to feel a wave of heat inside his car along with strange voices, almost like a distant choir. One voice told him he'd been transported to another country or possibly another planet by extraterrestrials. And for the next couple hours he drove through this strange place, even stopping a couple times to walk along the roadside and study the odd grass and the bizarre traffic. Noticed that cars passed him every 8 minutes or so, like clockwork. Eventually, Pedro reached a road sign with directions to his home or where he was coming from. Well, he chose to retrace his steps, but he suddenly found himself parked in front of his house, and he had no memory of how he got there. He tried to retrace his path, but the wide roads, the buildings, and the strange signs were gone now. And somehow the trip, which should have only taken him about 30 minutes, had lasted over 3 hours, and he'd burned way more fuel than normal. Just what in the hell is going on up in the sky in this first video? So here we see a group of folks hanging outside watching the sky, cause something just doesn't seem right. The sky is bright blue. The thing is, it's not daytime, and everyone's pretty shook up about it. Especially when the sky suddenly turns dark again, as we can see here. Now, clearly there is a storm. I mean, you see some subtle lightning flashes in the distance, there's dark clouds up above, but this was one serious flash of lightning, if that's even what it was. I mean, it really does look like there was a glitch in the sky, and then suddenly it became daytime for a few moments and then went back to normal. And here are some images of the sky that night. That looks pretty insane. If I saw that, I would definitely think the apocalypse was on its way. Funniest comment on this one, by the way, could be one of those high-powered flashlights. Yes, high-powered flashlights, known to do that to the sky. Can you make any sense of this next clip? Weird. Snow filling up the reflection in the mirror, but panning to the window, to outside, there looks to be no snow falling. I really wish snow worked this way here. I mean, it looks lovely when you don't actually have to go outside and shovel it, walk through it, drive through it, shiver through it, clean up all the snow residue you inevitably drag into your house. If we really are living in a simulation, I would just prefer, you know, this type of glitch to happen more often, is all I'm saying. Is that too much to ask for? The bird in this next video comes from Blue French Horn 26, who said that her daughter's boyfriend was on his way to lifeguard training when he spotted this. Just what is wrong with birds lately? This is not the first bird stuck in midair video that I've seen online, and what's interesting about this clip is the dude behind the camera is not the only one who notices that something is off. One guy had gotten out of his car to take a picture. So it's interesting that people at different angles saw the bird and noticed how weird it was. I say this because some commenters said the bird may have been suspended by fishing line or something, which is possible, but you certainly can't see any sign of that in the video. What do you all think of this one though? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. We usually talk about planes disappearing on this channel, but this is something else entirely. A plane that seems to just be sitting up in the sky. This one comes from TikToker Tanya.Draws, who was driving down a road in Chicago when she spotted the plane, and according to her, it was not the first time. What's crazy about this one is how low the plane is. I've seen other videos where people bug out about a plane seemingly frozen in the sky, but the plane is usually way higher up in the air. Easy for optical illusions to happen in that case, and while this could be an optical illusion too, it is just interesting to me how close this plane is. I mean, we get a nice, clear view here. Anyway, regardless of the explanation, I mean, it just looks super weird. This next video got a lot of people talking about a year back. So a man named Eddie from Fresno, California, going by Break and Pop on TikTok, posted a video showing the reflection of this orange Corvette C8 in the window of a strip mall. The thing is, no one can find the actual car in the parking lot. Eddie pans the camera across the lot multiple times, repeatedly asking, "Where is this car? I seriously don't see the car anywhere." This one went viral. Hundreds of commenters trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Eddie even included the text "glitch in the matrix" and asked in the caption if anyone could explain what was going on. Some said it was proof that we're living in a simulated world. Some eagle-eyed commenters also pointed out some other strange details about the video, like two mannequins on a bench and this weird bird bath sign that led one user to joke, "Do birds even read?" Seemed like there was just a lot of odd stuff about this parking lot. This story popped up on Reddit a couple years back from a user who deleted their account shortly after posting. Here's what they wrote. "I've lived in the same apartment for about 4 years. It's nothing fancy, 1 bedroom, open kitchen, small balcony, but about 2 weeks ago I came home from work and noticed something weird. The door handle felt different, like it was just slightly lower than I remembered. Same styles, same lock, just off. When I walked in, everything looked normal at first, but my keys were in a different bowl than I usually leave them. I thought maybe I was just tired, but then I noticed my bookshelf. There were 2 books on it that I don't own. One of them was a collection of short stories by Ray Bradbury that I'd been meaning to buy but hadn't yet. The other was a guidebook for a city I've never been to. I asked my girlfriend if she bought them over. She said no. I called my landlord just to be sure no one had entered while I was at work. He checked. Nothing. Since then, a few other tiny things have changed. A painting in the hallway is an inch higher. My phone background changed to a photo I don't remember taking. I know how this sounds, but it feels like I came back to a version of my life that's almost the same, just not quite." Guys, I can't speak to the validity of stories like this on Reddit. If you are experiencing things like this, go to a doctor. Just, some advice. In December of 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers stationed on the remote Flannan Isles off the coast of Scotland vanished without a trace. When a relief crew arrived after a storm had delayed them, they found the lighthouse empty. Everything inside was undisturbed. Clocks had stopped, meals were left on the table, and one of the men's coats was still hanging on a hook. The only clue was a logbook entry mentioning a violent storm, but the weather had actually been pretty calm the day they supposedly wrote it. No bodies were ever found. The official explanation is that a massive wave may have swept them out to sea, but that doesn't add up. Why were there no signs of struggle? No debris, nothing washed up. It was like they just stepped off the island and vanished. For decades, amateur astronomers and conspiracy theorists have pointed to something strange orbiting Earth, an unidentified object known as the Black Knight satellite. The story really kicked off in the 50s when both the US and Soviet Union detected something unusual in orbit. It wasn't one of theirs. It didn't match the movement of any known satellites at the time. And then there's the really weird part. In the 70s, images taken during a NASA mission seemed to show this strange, jagged object in orbit, and it didn't look like space junk or any known satellite. Some believe it's been up there for 13,000 years, sent by an ancient civilization or aliens as a monitoring device. Nikola Tesla himself claimed to have received a repeating signal from space in the 1890s, and some now connect that to this. No one knows exactly what it is. NASA says the object in the photos is just a thermal blanket that came loose during a mission, but that explanation doesn't sit well with people who've followed the story for decades. If it really is something watching us from above, then who or what put it there, and how long have they been watching? We haven't done a comment shout out for a while, so considering you guys left us some pretty interesting comments on part 1 of this video, I figured I'd read one out. From Dangleberry Snoot comes this comment. A person I knew died in 2018 and I attended her funeral. 3 years later, I was in a terrible car crash and came out without injury. Emergency service workers couldn't believe I walked away. Later that year, I received a message on Facebook that my friend in 2018, who died, had somehow just died, and I attended her funeral for a second time. Something very odd is occurring in this world. From Reddit user Flamingo comes an unsettling experience with an answering machine. Goes as follows. This happened about 15 years ago. I called my friend up and he wasn't home, so I left a message on his answering machine. I said, "Hey, it's me, kill all extremists. Sorry, I missed you. Call you later. Bye," and then hung up and left the house. I made no other calls. Later that day, he calls me back and he says, "Wow, that was quite a message you left. Who was that girl you were talking to?" I was like, "What are you talking about? I wasn't talking to any girl." Well, as it turns out, the message didn't end after I said bye. I had to go over to his house and listen to this message a few times. After my initial message that I did leave, there was a slight pause, and then it continues on for another 30 to 40 seconds or so, with me talking to some girl. It was my voice, but a conversation I never had with a girl whose voice I did not recognize. You could compare it to the message I know I did leave. And the two voices were indistinguishable. Not just the voice, but, the talking mannerisms. It was my voice. Also, references to my occupation and activities were the same. Basically, in this conversation, I was talking to this girl about going skiing, but I had to go down to my shop and work on a car first, which totally correlated to me. Then the message just stopped. It was recorded on one of those digital answering machines that records the message to a chip, so there was no tape I could have taken and analyzed, unfortunately. Also, I nor my friend had party lines, so that's not an explanation. It was very freaky. I can't explain it. Back in the summer of 1968, two teenagers working at a summer camp in Vermont, 16-year-old Michael Lapp and 19-year-old Janet Carnell, were just hanging out by the dock, watching the sun set over Lake Champlain. Most of the camp was empty because the kids were away at a swim meet. Pretty peaceful scene, but it didn't last. Michael spotted a weird light in the sky. At first he figured it was just a star, but then it suddenly dropped and started coming toward them. Soon, three smaller lights broke off from the main glow and started zigzagging over the water in ways no plane or helicopter could. The lights got closer, formed a triangle, and then one dove straight into the lake. Michael described the sound that followed like a, quote, 1,000 tuning forks, which is such an oddly specific comparison to make. Then he noticed a transparent dome on the craft, and inside were what he described as two childlike creatures with big heads, long necks, and huge eyes. The craft shot a beam at them, so Michael grabbed Janet and pulled her down as they felt themselves begin floating into the air. The next thing they knew, they were back sitting on the dock. But it was much later. Both were disoriented, and Janet seemed almost in a trance. Years later, Michael started having recurring nightmares, always about being taken. He recalled being inside the ship, seeing Janet examined, looking up through the dome at Earth and the stars. Janet later recalled the event, describing it almost exactly as Michael had, only she hadn't spoken to him in years. Researcher Walter Webb eventually concluded that the two had, quote, no opportunity for collusion, and that they'd experienced a, quote, real external event of unknown origin. Reddit user MissPack01 had a very odd experience with a school assignment. They write, I'm going to college in British Columbia, Canada, and I'm taking a business class. So first week of February, our teacher talks about an assignment that'll be due March 2nd. It's a 3-page paper with references on something we've learned in the class. That night he posts a little thing about due date, and expectation, and formatting, blah blah blah. I start the paper early to get it out of the way, but of course, life and work get in the way, so I forget about it for a week. Fast forward to yesterday's class and I start freaking out about the assignment. I go to my folder on the computer and it's not there for some reason. Oh no, maybe I forgot to save. Unlikely, but possibly. So when I get to class, I ask him if he wants it submitted online, because I didn't see a Dropbox, or handed in physically on Monday. Here's where it gets weird. He doesn't have a clue what I'm talking about. Says there never was any assignment. I got him to look on the course site where he posted the outline and nothing was there. I asked a couple classmates and nobody had a clue what I was talking about either. This is so weird. I'm only taking 2 classes as I work full time, so no, I did not get the assignment mixed with another class. In the last month, did I somehow walk through a door to another universe? Well, I can't tell you for sure, Redditor, but if I switched to a parallel universe that meant everything stayed normal, but I no longer had homework due, I would count that as a win. This one comes from a Redditor named Carla Ray 14, and if the title of the post, I'm convinced my parallel universe self was speaking to my family, doesn't creep you out already, then just listen to this. So about 5 years before she made the post, Carla's parents and 2 sisters were traveling around Europe. She stayed home with her husband and their baby. Well, one night at 3 a.m. her phone starts ringing. It's her dad. She ignores it at first, thinking maybe he forgot about the time difference, but then it rings again and again. When she finally checks her phone, she sees a dozen missed calls and a pile of messages from her family, all saying things like, everything will be okay, we're going to get the next flight home to be with you, stay strong, we love you. Completely freaked out, she answers the next call and demands to know what's going on. Her dad, sounding really shaken, tells her, I've just been on the phone with you for an hour, what do you mean what's going on? He insists that she called him in tears, saying her husband left her after she told him she was pregnant. Carla's husband was literally asleep beside her though. She says, Dad what are you talking about? He's right here. He hasn't walked out on me, and I'm definitely not pregnant. Her family swore it was her voice on the line though. Even her sister said she talked with Carla during the call, heard a friend in the background, and got details like Carla canceling her dentist appointment. Something that was actually true, but only her husband knew about. Carla had to send a photo of her and her husband right then and there to prove that nothing happened. To this day, her dad just shakes his head and says, I don't know what to believe. Is it possible someone was just making a prank call? I mean, I guess maybe, but they guessed a lot of specific details if that's the case. Is it also possible that some version of Carla from a parallel universe managed to call her dad in this one? I don't know. What do you guys think? So this next one is pretty creepy. A TikToker named Laughter Awaits posted this clip of a woman seemingly frozen in place. And the pair behind the camera are understandably totally dumbfounded by what they're seeing. Not only is this woman standing perfectly still, but her legs are crossed. I mean, like, how do you stand in this? I mean, I know you can't see me, but just imagine I'm crossing your legs, if you will. This video also goes on for over a minute, and she would have been standing like that before they started recording. Whoever this person is, she would be amazing at red light, green light, but all of a sudden, she just unfreezes and continues to walk like nothing happened. Very strange. Imagine seeing that at night though. You just look outside your bedroom window and she's there, just mid-stride, frozen in place. Those blinds would be getting closed. This next video comes from Lynn's No Hands, who wrote in the caption, why are all the same cars parked in this empty townhome neighborhood? Very good question, Linz. Let's take a look. So, yep, as the caption says, it's all the same car, different colors, sure, but same type. And they're all backed into the driveways. None are facing the other way. Pretty weird stuff. And I don't know about you, but whenever I'm driving past neighborhoods like this, I do get a weird feeling anyway. It's just, you know, a series of boring houses, all identical, just repeating over and over and over again. This, of course, takes it to a whole other level though. I mean, I don't know, like, did someone just buy this entire neighborhood and then turn it into a car dealership? Your guess is as good as mine. So back in 2023, a TikTok video posted by user unknown1575489, very catchy title, started making the rounds online. This video shows a person walking down a busy sidewalk, or rather, not walking. As we can all clearly see, this woman appears to be frozen mid-stride. It's not a still image, there are cars driving by. This person seems to be just stuck in place. Then moments later, the person just snaps back to reality and starts walking again. This video racked up more than 5.5 million views, with thousands of comments diving into theories. Most of them, of course, pointed straight to simulation theory, with users joking that this person was like an NPC in a video game. And yeah, I can't say I don't get some cyberpunk glitch vibes from this video. What's odd is that her hair doesn't even appear to move at all. It's one thing for someone to just stand as still as they can, but that bit is just extra odd. The hair not moving. And according to the uploader, she'd been standing like that for about a minute before he even started recording. So did this fish just learn to swim in midair? This video comes from TikToker Ruben.v.irs, and yeah, I do not know what the hell is happening here. So we watch as the water drains from the tank, but this fish doesn't go down with the water. It just stays at the exact level it was before, swimming around in the tank, just not with water around its body. Some of these things are really hard to describe in words, and here it is from another angle. And here, you'll notice that there are other fish in the tank, and they float down with the water as it drops further and further down the tank, because, you know, that's just how gravity works. But this one fish zips from the bottom of the tank to the top, where there's nothing but empty space. Pretty cool video. Just what in the fork is this? Posted by Nico Too Swift. He and his siblings watch as this fork does what no fork has done before. I sat down for a while trying to form the words to describe what I'm looking at, but I just gave up. I mean, you can see what's happening. Now, not only is this very weird, but reading the text, this was all filmed at his brother's place, which, according to him, was haunted. So apparently this was not the only strange thing they'd experienced at this house. A TikToker named Kilmaru started uploading videos over 2 years ago, with his first video captioned "I am very scared." In it, he's filming from his hotel window, looking out at a city street in broad daylight, and there's no one there. Then he walks outside. Restaurants, supermarkets, even a McDonald's, all stocked like normal, but it's completely silent. Since then, he's posted hundreds of videos from places that are normally crammed with tourists: the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the streets of London, amusement parks, the New York City subway, all empty. He claims that he slipped into another dimension, an eerily empty alternate reality version of Earth. His followers throw him challenges, telling him to visit specific spots to prove he's really alone, but every time, it's just him on camera. One of the craziest updates came when someone told him to go to Berlin airport to try and escape. He says he fell asleep in the lounge, then woke up on a massive ship at sea. For 6 days he explored it before jumping into a lifeboat and making it back to land. And just like that, he was back to wandering through a perfectly normal looking world where he's apparently the only person alive. Now, of course, I don't know whether you believe in the alternate reality thing or not, but it is impressive that he's managed to film so many iconic locations with no one else in frame. I don't know if he just happens to find super specific times, maybe there's some editing trickery going on, but I think this is an interesting little art project aside from the mystery. Reddit user 17DemondICKS shared a creepy story with the heading, "I think I stepped into a parallel universe for a moment." They were about 18 or 19 at the time, still living in their childhood home. It was summer, early afternoon, and they were heading out for one of their usual walks to a nearby park, something they'd done almost every day for years. They slipped on their shoes, opened the front door, and stepped outside, and instantly knew that something was off. Nothing looked different. The ravine next to the house, the tree in the yard, the driveway, the neighbors' homes, everything was exactly where it should be, but everything just felt inexplicably wrong. The Redditor said it was like reality itself had shifted in some subtle but deeply unsettling way. They stood there for a moment trying to shake off the feeling before heading down the driveway. About halfway down, they spotted their neighbor across the street tending to his garden. The neighbor looked up, froze. His face went completely pale like he'd just seen a ghost. The neighbor slowly opened his mouth about to say something with this look of terror on his face, but before the Redditor could respond, they were back inside the house, standing at the front door again, hand on the handle, about to step out. This time though, when they opened the door, the neighborhood felt completely normal again. The neighbor wasn't even outside anymore. Demon D's decided to skip the walk that day. Years later, they still can't explain the feeling. The thing that bothers them the most isn't even the sudden teleportation or the neighbor's terrified expression. It was indescribable wrongness, like they were looking at a completely different version of their own street. Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain were English academics who, in August of 1901, took a trip to the Palace of Versailles in France. After touring the main palace, they decided to walk through the gardens where Marie Antoinette used to hang out. They got lost and missed the turn from the main avenue, ending up on a quiet lane. Moberly noticed a woman shaking a white cloth out of the window, while Jourdain saw an old deserted farmhouse with a plow outside. That's when they started to notice this heavy, oppressive feeling wash over them. Moberly later described it as if, quote, everything suddenly looked unnatural, therefore unpleasant. Even the trees seemed to become flat and lifeless, like wood worked in tapestry, end quote. Then they came across two men who looked like gardeners but wore long coats and three-cornered hats, very old-timey clothing, even for 1901. Close by, a man sat near a garden kiosk, his face covered in smallpox. As they finally crossed the bridge into the gardens, Moberly spotted a woman sketching on the grass. The lady wore a light summer dress and a white hat. Her hair was old-fashioned. Moberly thought she was a tourist at first, but later became convinced that what they'd both seen was Marie Antoinette herself. Neither mentioned what happened for a week, but after comparing notes and researching some of the history of the place, they believed they had somehow stepped back to August 10th of 1792, just weeks before the French monarchy was overthrown. The story blew up when they published it in 1911 under fake names in their book An Adventure. Years later, they found an old map that showed the bridge they said they crossed, and that bridge wasn't on any newer maps, cause it no longer existed. It hadn't for a long time. To this day, this is still one of the most famous and well-documented time slip stories in existence. Reddit user Albert Norman 2069 shared a wild story about what he thinks was a brief trip into an alternate timeline. He says it happened on June 28th, 2014. His day started normally, waking up, brushing his teeth, eating breakfast, and getting in the car for work. But when he switched on the radio, things suddenly got strange. Instead of his usual music station, there was a news talk show playing. The host was talking about a recent victory in the Great War, praising troops in the military. At first, Albert figured it was just about the ongoing withdrawal from Afghanistan, but then the host started talking about a victory in Italy and how this win would finally end a second Great Depression. He was kind of confused, but figured it was just a radio play or something, so he just kind of brushed it all off. This wasn't the last he'd heard of this, though. Later during lunch, Albert overheard coworkers chatting about that same victory in Italy and something about preserving unity. They also kept repeating the numbers 33-13. Finally, he was like, all right, what's going on here? So he asked, what the hell they were talking about, and they looked at him all offended and basically told him that his question was disrespectful to the troops. That's when Albert noticed a coworker named Sam was missing. But disturbingly, when he asked about him, nobody seemed to know who Sam was at all. On his way home, Albert took a different route through the city and things just got more unsettling. He noticed there were these banners celebrating the victory, showing Marines landing on a foreign beach. The city also looked way poorer than he remembered. There were abandoned storefronts, some buildings actually looked like they were crumbling. At home, he turned on CNN and the anchors were discussing how American forces had defeated Italian logistical targets with minimal civilian casualties, how insurgencies in Greece and Ireland were winding down. At this point, Albert was kind of getting terrified. He had no idea what was going on. Was he losing his mind? Was this a bad dream? Well, he did what anyone would do. He went straight to Wikipedia. That's when he found a detailed page about a war he'd never heard of. This one comes out of Berkshire County, Massachusetts, back in September 1st of 1969. That night, dozens of people claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky over Sheffield. Some described them as being attached to a disc-shaped craft, and even stranger, a lot of witnesses said they couldn't account for chunks of time after watching it. It wasn't just like, I saw lights and went home. People felt like something really happened to them. One of the most talked about witnesses is Thomas Reed. He was only 9 at the time, riding in a car with his mom, brother, and grandmother. He said they first saw glowing orbs shoot out from the trees along the road. When they got near the Sheffield Bridge, things got even weirder. It came to a stop off the right side of the road. Everything got really calm. It was like being in the middle of a hurricane. There was like a barometric change in pressure. It was just like a dead silence. Then there was an eruption of crickets and frogs and it got really loud and that was it, end quote. Next thing they knew, they were back in the car, but 2 hours had passed. His mom and grandmother had even switched seats and no one could explain how. Reed later said they regained flashes of memory about being inside some massive hangar with curved hallways and other people were there too. As for where they were, who the hell knows? This next story was shared by a now deleted Reddit user and goes as follows. Okay, I don't really know how to explain this without sounding insane, but I've been thinking about it for years and I still can't make sense of it. Back in 2016, I was driving home from my job around 2 a.m. I live in a small town, so the roads are usually dead quiet at that time. There's one stretch of highway I always take that goes past a gas station, then about a 15-minute straight before I hit my exit. Well, this time though, something was off. I passed the gas station like usual, but when I looked at the digital clock in my car, it said 2:17. I swear it had been 2:04 the last time I checked. Right as I passed the station, that stretch of road normally takes 15 minutes, but somehow it felt like it just skipped. I don't remember zoning out, I don't remember seeing anything weird, it was just like the time jumped forward and I was closer to home than I should have been. The creepier part is the gas station itself. For a couple months after that, whenever I drove by it, the lights were off. The pumps were wrapped in yellow tape and the sign was taken down. When I asked a coworker about it, they told me that gas station has been shut down for years, but I know I stopped there plenty of times, and I definitely remember seeing it open that night. I don't have proof, I know it sounds like bad memory or whatever, but I can't shake the feeling that I've somehow crossed into a place where things aren't exactly the same. On October 11th, 1973, two guys from Mississippi, Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson, went out night fishing in the Pascagoula River. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, but then Parker noticed blue lights hitting the water. At first he figured it was the cops telling them to pack it up, but what came next was nothing close to that. A big light came out of the clouds. Parker later said it was a blinding light. It was hard to tell with the lights so bright, but it looked like it was shaped like a football, about 80 foot. It made a very loud sound. It was just a hissing noise, end quote. Then three strange floating creatures came out of the craft. They didn't have legs, and Parker said they had mitten-shaped claws. One was gray and didn't have a neck. Another looked more feminine. When one of them reached for Parker, instead of panicking, he suddenly felt calm. I think they injected us with something to calm us. I was kind of numb and went along with the program, he said. Both men claimed they were pulled aboard the craft and examined. Hickson remembered. There were no seats, no chain. They just moved me around and I couldn't resist them. I just floated, felt no sensation, no pain. He also described a giant eye-like machine scanning them. He reported everything to the sheriff that night, and deputies secretly recorded them afterward, expecting them to slip up. Instead, they caught the men whispering in fear. Jesus Christ, God have mercy, they had us. They could have done anything to us, Hickson said. For decades, Parker stayed mostly quiet, only writing a book in 2018 after Hickson's death, and that's when other locals came forward saying they saw something strange in the sky that very same night. In 1957, a Brazilian farmer named Antonio Vilas Boas claimed he was abducted by aliens. Working late in his fields to avoid the heat, he said he saw a red star approaching, which turned out to be an egg-shaped craft with a rotating red light. Boas alleged that 5-foot-tall beings in gray overalls and helmets captured him and took him aboard, where he was subjected to blood tests and a strange gas that made him violently ill. He also claimed a female alien engaged with him intimately and indicated she would raise their child in space. 4 hours later, he was released and watched as the craft just flew back up into the sky. A lot of people obviously dismissed his story, but a man named Dr. Olavo Fontes noted Boas had burns, bruising, and nausea. Boas later became a lawyer, but he never shook this incident. He'd often craft models of the UFO he claimed to have seen, and he stuck to his story till his death in 1991. Alright, this one's a bit of a strange rabbit hole. It revolves around a movie that doesn't actually exist, but has a bizarre legend attached to it. So there's this film that supposedly starred the actor Sinbad. If you're like me, you know him from the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Jingle All the Way. But some also remember Sinbad having been in this movie called Shazam in the 90s, where he played a genie. The premise is that he granted wishes and caused chaos in typical 90s kids movie fashion. A lot of people swear they saw this movie, renting it or watching reruns of it on TV. The only problem is no one can find it now. For years, people have tried to track down any trace of this Shazam movie, but it doesn't seem to exist anywhere in any record. Sinbad himself has even come out and said, like, yeah, I never made that movie. And yet, a surprising number of people are adamant that they remember it. It's become one of the more popular Mandela effects, where a large number of people remember something one way, which turns out to be different, or in this case, not even existing at all. So, what's going on here? Well, one theory is that people are confusing it with another movie called Kazam, starring Shaquille O'Neal as the genie, which was released in 1996. And yeah, I can see people getting confused about the name, but I mean, are all of these people really confusing Sinbad with Shaq? That doesn't really add up. I mean, it's possible, but what if there's a parallel universe where things are just slightly different, and in that universe, there really is a movie called Shazam starring Sinbad, and this very second, there's another version of me filming a video being like, damn, I could have sworn there was a movie called Kazam back in the 90s starring Shaq, but nobody can find it. Next up is Bermeja, a whole island that completely vanished. This one's wild because it really was a real place, a tiny island in the Gulf of Mexico near the Yucatan Peninsula. You could find it on old maps, and even the Mexican government used to claim that it existed. In fact, it was officially documented as part of Mexico's territory, right in the area where they had a territorial dispute with the US over oil rights. Well, in 1997, a Mexican Navy survey came out saying the island was no longer there. They couldn't find it with any of their modern equipment, even though it was supposed to be there, of course. Having been marked on maps for hundreds of years, the island seemed to have just disappeared though. Well, your first thought is that it probably just sank into the ocean, but that's highly unlikely because the area was relatively shallow and there's actually no sign of the island ever having existed in the first place. So what are some other possibilities? Well, some people think it was deliberately erased from maps as part of some secret government deal. Others say cartographers had been wrong the entire time, and that the island was either never there or is a misidentified rock or sandbar that got labeled as an island. But there's a more fringe idea too, one that ties into the title of this video, of course. The idea that Bermeja never existed in the first place, and what we're actually dealing with is a glitch or shift between parallel universes. Some say it's like the island slipped through the cracks of time and was never meant to be in our reality at all. Now let's talk about Flight 19, one of the most famous disappearances in aviation history, and of course, it's tied to the Bermuda Triangle. This incident goes back to December 5th of 1945. Flight 19 was a training mission for 5 US Navy bombers flying out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Everything was going well until something went horribly wrong. The pilots lost their bearings and they got disoriented. According to reports, they were never able to get a proper fix on their location, and things quickly went from bad to worse. One of the pilots even reported that the compass wasn't working right, but the entire squadron of 5 planes just vanished, like they were swallowed up by the ocean. No wreckage was ever found, and the Navy couldn't figure out exactly what happened. And on top of that, a rescue plane was sent out to search for them. That plane also went missing. No trace of it was ever found either. The story just adds more mystery when you consider how much equipment was searching and still nothing showed up. People started speculating, of course. Some think it was probably a simple navigation error or mechanical failure, nothing too crazy, but others believe that the Bermuda Triangle was involved, that maybe this mysterious region of the ocean is some sort of portal or electromagnetic anomaly that messes with navigation systems, sucking planes and ships into some other dimension or an alternate reality. Others go even further, saying that UFOs or time warps are to blame, but at the end of the day, no one knows what really happened to Flight 19, which is exactly why it's still talked about to this day. The USS Cyclops was this massive American naval vessel that disappeared without a trace in 1918. It was carrying over 300 crew members and a hefty load of manganese ore from the Caribbean to Baltimore, and it vanished somewhere again in the Bermuda Triangle. It's one of the most baffling disappearances in naval history, and what makes it so mysterious is that this wasn't just a random ship lost at sea. It was a huge ship with a solid reputation. It was part of the US Navy during World War II. The Cyclops had been a workhorse for the Navy for years, but when it set out from Barbados in March of 1918, something obviously went wrong. It didn't check in when it was supposed to, and no one heard from it again. The ship was huge, 541 feet long, and it was designed to withstand the rough seas, so it's hard to believe it could just sink without a trace. No wreckage was ever found. Some think a freak storm or a mechanical failure could have caused it to sink. Others believe the ship was sabotaged, maybe by enemies during the war, but because the thing disappeared somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle, some people of course think something stranger may have happened. It said Europe had collapsed into a civil war with Greece and Ireland occupied by coalition forces facing nationalist insurgencies, that the US was deep in a depression and the global financial system was in chaos. Albert took screenshots of the pages. After he woke up, those pictures were still on his phone. Yes, he shared them on a Reddit post. This experience led him to wonder about parallel universes, pointing to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. The idea that every decision creates a split, a different timeline. So Albert thinks somehow, just for a day, he slipped into one of those darker alternate realities. 6 years ago, Reddit user Peeny Bino shared a pretty unsettling experience. She was driving to work, stopped in a left turn lane when a car pulled up behind her. Out of nowhere, this intense cold fear hit her. It was like she just knew the car was going to crash into them. The car behind stopped gently a few yards back, but the fear didn't go away. Then things got even weirder. She felt this sudden jolt through her body, so strong it felt like the car actually moved with her. Checking the rear mirror, the other car was still there. The light turned green, and just before she took her foot off the brake, an excruciating pain exploded in her neck and head. She also noticed a strong smell and a taste of gasoline. It was overwhelming. She slowly rolled down the window, moved through the intersection, and gave an apologetic wave to the driver behind her. Pino Bino pulled into the office parking lot, trembling. The pain and gasoline smell, they eventually went away, but she was still shaken for the rest of the day. She even felt afraid to get back into the car at the end of the day. She called her fiancé, who joked, "Maybe you died in a car accident in an alternate universe and you felt it." Pino Bino just laughed that off at the time, but says she hasn't been able to shake that idea since. Years ago, a now deleted Reddit user shared a haunting story in an Ask Reddit thread about feeling a deep connection to someone they met in a dream. He explained that during his last semester at college, he was tackled by a massive football player, 325 pounds compared to his 120. He was unconscious for a little bit, but ended up being okay. He met an amazing woman, and after months of chasing her and dealing with a few jerk boyfriends, they ended up getting married. Soon after, they had a daughter. He had a good job, his wife stayed home to take care of the kid, and when their daughter was 2, they had a son. Life was almost picture perfect, but one day, while sitting on the couch, he noticed something off about a lamp in his room. Its perspective was inverted, like it was 3D, but just wrong. He couldn't look away, staying up all night staring at it. The next morning, he didn't go to work. Over the next few days, he stopped eating and barely left the couch, completely fixated on this lamp. His wife started getting worried, called someone to talk to him, but he knew something was really wrong here. It was like his mind was unraveling. Eventually, he had an epiphany. That lamp wasn't real. Neither was his house, the wife, the kids, or the last 10 years of his life. That's when the lamp grew bigger in his vision, turning everything red while he heard screams and felt intense pain. And he suddenly woke up, lying on the sidewalk, surrounded by strangers. He was still on the ground, just having come back too from being tackled by the football player. In the brief time he'd been unconscious, he'd imagined an entire life. But it felt very real to him, too real. In his own words, "I went through about 3 years of horrid depression. I was grieving the loss of my wife and children, dealing with the knowledge that they never existed. I was scared that I was going insane, as I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams. I never have, but sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He's perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says." This next story comes from Gunzo, who said he once dreamed he was driving home, listening to old music, when he spotted a badly damaged car on the side of the road. He stops, calls for help, and finds an unconscious young woman with short curly blonde hair inside. Drags her out, gives her first aid, until an ambulance arrives. When he glanced back at the woman though, she was suddenly wide awake and shocked, and that's when he woke up. Well, weeks go by, and his uncle gives him a family photo collage for his birthday. Among the pictures was his mom, young, pregnant at the time. She was also covered in scars. In fact, she looked exactly like the woman from his dream. When he told his dad about this, his dad said, well, a man rescued his mom after a car accident 25 years earlier, and then mysteriously vanished. Redditor this_IUS shared a strange story about his friend Gavin, who he said was incredibly smart, like higher IQ than anyone he knew. This happened when they were teens. One day, the Reddit user made an impromptu stop at Gavin's place. He knocked on the door and was shocked when a middle-aged man answered. It was not Gavin's dad. And things only got stranger. When he asked if Gavin was home, the man said, "I am Gavin." The man looked very confused. After some back and forth, the man was like, "Okay, yeah, he'll be back later." It seemed he just wanted to be left alone. Well, later, when the Redditor told Gavin about this, Gavin insisted no one else had been there, and he'd been home the whole time, too. This led to a theory. Had that middle-aged man actually been Gavin, a future version of him that had somehow briefly slipped back in time. So there's this guy, Unicoso Braviente on Instagram, he's got a pretty insane story. He says that he woke up in a hospital in Valencia, Spain, completely alone. No clue who he was or how he got there. Even stranger, all the electronics read 2027. He found his hospital records and discovered that he'd been admitted on February 10th, 2021, unconscious with a high fever. Now, he's been posting all these short videos exploring the city, but it's always empty. Hospitals, police stations, fire stations, metros, airports, highways, all totally void of people. Of course, folks online constantly call him out for faking it, but some of his posts are pretty intriguing. He films himself in restricted areas, even taking cars, motorcycles, and jewelry. On March 23rd, he found an old Spanish Civil War bomb shelter. In it, he found a folder. And in that folder was some very strange information pertaining to him. It said he was trapped in some other dimension between 2021 and 2027. He'd been part of some secret mission. There was also blueprints for a time machine. The folder had equations and diagrams that eventually seemed connected to a particle accelerator at the Valencia Physics Institute. Now, it's all pretty outlandish, but it does make for a pretty interesting watch. Is this dude really posting videos from some alternate dimension he's trapped in? I mean, I'd love to think that, but if nothing else, it's very creative. Astronomers recently got an incredible look at a black hole called RxJ1131, and the photo they captured is pretty cool. The black hole itself can't be seen, but the superheated gas around it, called the corona, stretches about as far as our entire solar system. When researchers looked closely at the photo, they noticed tiny flickers in the light that didn't make sense. They were only able to see this level of detail because a galaxy sitting between us and the black hole kinda acts like a giant zoom lens. The galaxy's gravity bends and magnifies the light from the black hole, creating multiple images and letting astronomers spot details they normally couldn't. Lead researcher Mattis Ryback said, quote, "Within a few days of looking at the data, we realized, okay, this does not look right." The flickers weren't coming from the black hole. They appeared independently across the images. Turns out that individual stars in the foreground galaxy were briefly magnifying different parts of the corona. By studying these flickers in the photo, the team could map the corona and even get hints about the black hole's magnetic fields. So the point is, they're getting to learn a lot about this black hole through these images. And if we know anything about black holes, it's that we really don't know a whole lot. Black holes are incredibly mysterious. What happens to things that are pulled in? Where do they go? Do they connect to other parts of the universe? Could they be portals to parallel universes? At this point, we have no idea. It was just after midnight on January 21st in Chile's Patagonia region. Quiet, empty, middle of nowhere. A wildlife camera trap set up by the University of Magallanes to study animals suddenly snapped 3 photos in the span of 2 seconds. What shows up isn't an animal though. It's a set of bright descending lights. According to biologist Alejandro Kush, quote, "Apparently these lights were initially distant, approached and remained in front of the camera, dazzling it in a movement that appears to be descending." Now, this camera wasn't near a road or houses. It was in a meadow, far off from anything man-made. And these traps are designed to prevent tampering. They've got infrared, motion sensors, so this is pretty strange. But it's not the first time strange lights like this have been reported. Locals have talked about what they call bad lights. For generations they've talked about it, describing them as spirits crossing the fields at night. Scientists and UFO researchers have both looked at these photos. Some think it could be a rare plasmoid, kind of like a ball of plasma similar to ball lightning. Thing is, there were no storms, no conditions at the time that would have caused something like that. UFO researcher Freddie Alexis ran tests and calculated that if it was a distant flying object, it was moving at around 590 miles per hour. In 1587, a group of English settlers landed on Roanoke Island, which is off the coast of modern-day North Carolina. They were sent to establish a permanent colony, but when a supply ship returned in 1590, they were gone, completely vanished. The settlement was empty, not a single person was left behind. There wasn't even any sign of a struggle. It was as if the whole colony had never even been there in the first place. But they had been. There was a clue that remained. The only sign of them was Croatoan carved into a tree, the word. Now, the thing is, Croatoan was the name of a nearby island and also the name of a Native American tribe in the area. So, some believe the settlers may have tried to integrate with the tribe, but why would they leave behind such a cryptic message? Could they have been forced to leave by some hostile force, or did they just abandon the colony altogether? Maybe they just moved further inland, but then why did they leave no trace of where they went? Of course, there's also the theory that something much stranger happened. Some people wonder the settlers didn't vanish into the woods or the sea at all, but rather slipped into some other dimension, like a glitch in the fabric of time or space. Could Roanoke have been one of those spots in history where a tear in reality caused an entire settlement to disappear? Now, I will admit that this one may be a bit of a stretch, but I do think it's kind of fascinating, so I feel like it's worth adding here. You might not even know this, but at one point in US history there were $1,000 bills. The US Treasury printed $1,000 notes. These bills were mainly used for huge bank transfers and business deals, not something people would really carry around in their wallet. They were officially discontinued in 1969, along with other high-value bills like $500 and even $5,000 notes. But a lot of these old bills have just disappeared. The US Treasury estimates that millions of dollars worth of these $1,000 bills are still out there somewhere, but where? I mean, are they all hidden away in private collections? Maybe, but there are some conspiracy theories here too. Some believe that certain bills were deliberately destroyed or hidden by the government to keep the true extent of the nation's wealth under wraps. Others think that the bills might still be circulating under the radar in the hands of shadowy people in underground deals. Next is a very strange phenomenon called the Taos Hum, a low-frequency sound that can only be heard by a small percentage of people. But for those who do hear it, it's maddening. This hum is mostly heard around Taos, New Mexico, but there have been reports from all over the world of similar sounds in other locations like parts of England, Canada, and Japan. The hum is described as this low rumbling sound, like a distant diesel engine running constantly. But when investigators try to find the source, well, they can't. It's not coming from machinery or anything else that can be easily identified. People who hear it often report feeling headaches and insomnia though. Scientists have thrown out theories like tinnitus, which is an ear condition that can cause ringing in the ears, but this isn't really a ringing sound. Some wonder if the hum could be related to electromagnetic fields in the area or seismic activity in the Earth's crust, but some people believe the Taos Hum may be stranger, caused by interdimensional energy shifting through our world because of some tear in the fabric of reality, a hint of a parallel universe bleeding through. In 1966, two Brazilian men, Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana, were found dead on a hilltop wearing lead masks, the kind used to shield from radiation. A cop found their bodies after they'd gone missing. The men were lying side by side, there were no signs of a struggle, and there was a small bottle of water next to them. But the masks, nobody could figure out what those were about. They were also carrying a note that looked like instructions for some sort of ritual, mentioning radiation and how to use the masks. The whole thing made it seem like they were about to do some sort of experiment, but no one could figure out what. Were they part of some secret cult? Were they trying to contact aliens? Or were they mixed up in some government experiment? Nobody knows, and no one ever found out how they died.